Welcome to the Orthodontic Pearls Podcast, where we share tips and tricks to better your clinic, business, and life. Today we have our honored guest, Dr. C. Colby Gage, as we discuss DSOs versus private practice, startups versus acquisitions, digital tools, and of course, some dad jokes. And now your hosts of the podcast, Drs. Chris Teeters, Brian Anderson, and Andy Sarpadar.
Welcome back to the Orthodontic Pearls Podcast, everyone. I'm thrilled to have a special episode for you today. Filling in for my regular co-host is Dr. Chris Setta, a board-certified orthodontist at Blue Wave Orthodontics, inventor of the Precision Aligner button, and host of the Illuminate Orthodontic Podcast. Thanks for joining us today, Chris. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. Delighted to be here today. Thanks so much. And I just want to say a quick congrats to you, Andy, Chris, and Brian on this podcast. It's fantastic. I've tuned in to every episode, and I'm loving the fresh take on the podcast format.
Oh, thanks so much, Chris. That is definitely high praise coming from you. You've been doing this for a couple of years now. I am a regular on listening to your show. I know we have our episodes scheduled a little bit later this year. Yep, we'll be doing that. But really great things. Way to pave the road for the rest of us here. How's it feel being on the other side of the interview?
Oh, I'm excited today. You picked the obvious body double in terms of me for Brian Anderson, right? Because physically, we are so similar. Fun fact, we are celebrating my 5th year of podcasting this Sunday.
That's great. That's crazy, man. The time flies. Really well done there, Chris. Thanks for being on the show today.
Excited to be here.
Today we have a fantastic guest who is not only a personal friend of mine, but also someone I have insightful conversations with pretty much weekly. He's one of the most focused and intelligent individuals I know, the owner and founder of Level Up Orthodontics, and a standout speaker on the lecture circuit. Dr. Colby Gage. How are you doing today, Colby?
Hey, thanks, Andy. And this is really fun to be on this. I'm excited to just get a chance to film some of the conversations that Andy and I, have been having. And I think there's just a lot of different nuances that practicing orthodontics now in 2025 and even just my own background, I think that we can get into today. So I'm excited to share that.
Beautiful. Well, I'm excited to hear about that. And then finally, to round out our lineup for this morning, we have Dr. Chris Teeters, who might have to duck out a little bit early today. He had a little family incident, but thanks for being with us today, Chris. How are you doing today?
Oh, feeling great, man. I'm so excited to share the stage again with Dr. Setta in a different way because we played in Relapse together many years, and Colby being one of the first and biggest fans of the Mother of Pearls conference. I remember you're one of the first ones to come and bring along your friend Daniel, who's been our video guy, amazing, talented guy every year ever since. So you've always been just a champion of the group and of the meeting, and I appreciate you so much, Colby, and Setta for all your support over the years as well. So excited to be on this podcast with both of you.
Awesome, guys. Well, let's jump right into it. I want to talk a little bit about Colby's background. Now, Colby and I met, was that 2017, 2018, like online, something like that? Mm-hmm. I remember I was just like a year or two into my startup practice, Icon Orthodontics, here in Surprise, Arizona. And I got a message from a guy owning the Icon Orthodontics up in Calgary. So just happened to have the same name as mine. I think actually your predecessor had the name first. I don't want to say I copied it, but maybe. At any rate, so that's how we first got in touch, and we've sort of kept in touch through meetings ever since. I know I've followed your journey pretty closely, and it's a fascinating one. And like I said before, we just tend to bounce ideas off each other. I find you to be one of the more well-reasoned people in the profession, and really value your insight there. So tell us a little bit about how you first got started, Colby. Where did you go to school? How did you end up first in Canada? Where have you gone since then?
Yeah, no, that's great. Well, I grew up in Southern California, and like many people in Colorado, grew up in Southern California, right? That's typically what I hear around here. And I did dental school at Western University in Pomona, which is coincidentally where the Ormco factory is now. So not a lot in Pomona, but I was the first class in a new dental school. So it was really exciting. I met Craig Andraco, who was the head of special projects at Ormco when I was there doing an externship at Loma Linda's residency program, kind of trying to figure out where I fit in. And Dr. Steve Tracy was also practicing in Upland. And so I spent a lot of time in his office, as well as another doctor, Andrea Feather, in Chino Hills. So I had a little bit of initial kind of interest in ortho, and then ultimately applied. And being the first first student to apply from a brand new school, it's kind of daunting to come into this profession with no real ties or no one, paving the way in front of you. And I think that trend has kind of continued throughout my career, is being like, well, I feel like I'm, trailblazing based on the fact that there is no one in front of me to do anything other than that, right? And that's kind of been adopting digital systems and doing a lot of different things that I've done. I feel like it's been more or less a type and shadow of that same experience I had in dental school. So I applied, went to Arizona. They were non-match at the time, so it was my first interview, and I just said, hey, this looks like a great program. Studied under Jay Park, who's now the head of the JODO board, and then also the ABO. So he was a great mentor as well, and let me do a lot of indirect bonding actually in ortho residency. So I trialed a brand new system out of Korea for indirect bonding when I was a student there, and we had a lot of faculty who were very prominent in the digital arena, so I had a lot of exposure that way. And then from that point, you're a resident kind of looking for a job, and so I had some family out in Calgary actually, and it was my brother-in-law's sister-in-law. Okay, so kind of a long stretch there, but we met at a wedding. And she said, "Oh, you're going to be an orthodontist." I was like, "Yeah, well, I'm just starting. I'm about ready to start residency in Arizona." And she's like, "Man, you should come up here and practice." And I knew a few dentists up in Calgary, and all of them had like Ferraris, like all of them. So I'm like, okay, there's something going on here. Like what's the deal? And they had a good quality of life, and many of them said, you should come up here. Like, we would love to have you. And it's a great place to practice dentistry. So I met Dr. Corey Lowe through this kind of family connection, and he owned Icon Orthodontics and had been there for almost 20 years, and had some kind of medical issues and just other family issues that said, hey, I want to, move in a different direction and pursue some other things. And he said, hey, why don't you come up and we'll practice together, and you'll take over. And so that was the kind of the start of it. So early on in my residency, I kind of had this practice in mind, and we connected really well. And then right after school, went up and worked with him for 10 months side by side, which you just don't see that anymore. Like how many transition plans have two doctors working in a single location, the same schedule, side by side for that long? I don't see that. And it was fantastic. I mean, that single, that 10 months, even if I'm doing things different clinically today, what I learned in those 10 months about patient management, working with a team, efficient practices, and even just understanding, hey, if someone's done it this way for that long, what can I pull out of that as a pearl? And what things can I say, okay, it was done this way. Am I okay with those disadvantages? Yeah. It's so easy when someone, and he had the same breakfast every day. I'll never forget. It was like Greek yogurt, mixed berries, and granola on the top. And this sounds like
Teeters over here is smiling. Gave us a thumbs up.
So Dr. Lowe did that every single day that I worked with him. He had that same breakfast. And so when I was looking at his cases and looking at his systems, I could appreciate kind of that scientific method of how he ran his practice, where if I just change one thing, I can directly see the impact on that single change. And so that was a really big kind of incubation period for me to learn how I wanted to practice. And one of the takeaways that I got from that original transition period was just simply understanding, what kind of doctor do I want to be? What things am I willing to endow my practice with in terms of my time and my talents? And what type of interactions do I want with my team? One thing that he always did is he took a trip with his team every year. And sometimes it was educational events, sometimes it was just for fun. And I've heard other speakers and other people, plant those seeds as well, that some of the best things they ever did were taking their team and doing educational events, like going to Pearls. And so I've taken my team to the Pearls meeting, and they always had a great time and learned a lot, and they were just exposed to new things. I think that's never going to be a bad thing for your team. Even if it's not something you're currently doing, we need to know what's going out there in the profession, and we want to know what other thought leaders are doing and how they're driving change based on the things they're seeing in their practice. Because we can't practice the same way we did in 2015 and 2025. It's not the same. No. Our parents aren't the same. Our patients, what they're asking for is not the same. And we have so many more options with digital orthodontics now that it doesn't make any sense to keep doing things the same way we've always done them. So
no, you're absolutely right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So in that kind of, being true to yourself kind of vibe, my wife about a year into that was like, hey, I don't know if I want to live in Canada. And I'm like, whoa, we just moved out here. I'm taking over this practice. Basically it was like October of 2016. And she's like, I'm like,
so wait,
okay,
how many years were you there at that point?
So
how many
almost
years in the practice?
Just about a year in. She was like, hey,
1 year
sure
in?
I like
Wow.
this. Yeah. And she had done high school there for about a year. And so she had some friends there, but a lot of them moved away, and our family was kind of, sparse through the area. So I kind of said, hey, let's just see how this goes. We were looking at a property that had a really nice view and things that we, thought would kind of make up for some of that. Sure. And at the same time, my brother-in-law moved to Colorado. And so they have 4 kids the same age as our 4 kids. And we went and visited him a few times in that after I had transitioned, and then I had acquired a new practice. Another doctor had retired and moved in with me. And so I had a lot of things going, but really the kicker was, hey, if my family's not happy, if we're not thriving in this environment, it's going to take a lot of money to make up for that. And that's not really the path that I wanted to go down. And just
sure.
Not feeling close to family and the connections that mattered to my wife and family. So we were traveling back and forth, for holidays and visiting our family in Denver. And I kind of said, you know what, like, let's just do this. And so this was 2019. So before COVID, then I said, let's start making a transition plan here. And I did find a way to transition out of the practice that worked out pretty well with the timing that I wanted. And so my last day was actually March 2nd of 2020 in Canada.
Wow.
So this is like a week before COVID.
That was like the month we shut down.
Yes.
Yeah,
so
right?
so I was in Costa Rica. So I was lecturing for Invisalign at their Canadian study club at the time. And I was down in Costa Rica, which is super fun. We were talking about Invisalign first and some of the things we were doing. And then by the time we came back in the airport, everyone's wearing masks. And I'm like, okay, what's this mask thing? And I get back to the practice and I'm like, so I had the space already leased at that point. We were going to start construction in the next month or two, and I had a friend who was willing to let me work as an associate in Denver. And so I thought I would just kind of travel back and forth. And I kind of, at that point, I was getting a little kind of antsy, and I said, hey, what if I just left? What would it work if I could, with the transition doctors that were there were 2 doctors that took over. I thought, what if I just left a month earlier? I think it was June was supposed to be my exit date, which coincided with the end of school. And they said, we'll talk about it. And they said, sure, we're fine. And so we agreed to end the transition early. And then literally we got shut down. So I had in the entire COVID lockdown to figure out what the heck I was going to do with this new practice that I was starting in Colorado with nothing else to do but just think about it. Because there was no way I could market. Nothing was happening on the construction side. I was using Joe Architect out of Denver, and they're like, hey, we're on pause until, whenever this, things get lifted. And so that's when I really started leaning into the branding of our practice, which ultimately is now called Level Up Orthodontics. And it was a really interesting process to take a step back and say, how are we going to build this practice from scratch now that we have literally 0 time pressure to make money? We have, nothing but time in terms of figuring out when this thing is even going to get built. And then we really just said, okay, well, what, in our grandest dreams, what would this look like? And what would we actually be able to accomplish? And so that was where working with my cousin, who's the brand manager for our practice, who has a branding company, that's where we really leaned into all these things and found out a lot about really what makes me tick and how I want that to ultimately express in a practice. But I would have never known those things had I not been, a practice builder and owner and all these other things before. So I think a lot of people that are doing startups, it's like, how can you do a startup with no background? Like, you don't even know who you are at that point.
It's tough.
It's a great point.
And so, Andy, how many years did you practice before you did your startup? Was it right out of school? I'm trying to remember.
I did 1 year at a corporate office. Before I started the process of doing a startup. My plan was to find a practice to acquire. Yeah. And I gave myself a year to find something, and nothing came up. everything that I was seeing, there wasn't much, but what I was seeing was mostly dying practices, under 500K of production and just sort of on their way out. And in a competitive market, I decided I don't need to inherit someone else's failure. So I gave myself a year. And once that deadline hit, I said, I'm just going to start up. I'm going to pick the best site that I can. I did a lot of demographics research, and just stuck the shovel in the ground and got to work. But like you said, that is a Herculean task when you have no mentorship, when you have no background. I mean, I knew some stuff from corporate, but a lot of how I didn't want to run a practice. And that is tough, and I was still swimming while I was building it. So working the corporate office and signing my paychecks over to the new construction, definitely a challenge. So I agree with you. If I had the opportunity to do some mentorship ahead of time, if I had the foresight to do that ahead of time and maybe plan it out a little bit better, I probably could have saved myself a few years of heartache. So,
to go back to something you said, Colby, and honored to be on the podcast with you, by the way.
Yeah, thanks.
I graduated from my program in 2012, and it is such a unique experience to be able to practice side by side with another doctor. Teeters, I know you had that opportunity with your father-in-law too. I had some great mentors, Mike DeLuca, Richard Kay, Jason Rothenberg. I don't know if the graduating residents now really have that unique opportunity, because a lot of times I think it's sort of plug and play into a new practice and go ahead and make your production. But I learned so much, because when you're coming out of residency, you're using so many different bracket systems, so many different philosophies. In a way, your head's spinning. You don't really have systems, right? So for me, those years were so formative and so important. And in hindsight, I'm very grateful for those.
Absolutely. And Chris, now you had the mentorship. You had probably more mentorship than I think you wanted, right?
That's the other extreme, right? There's one way to do it, and that was Larry's way. So I appreciated getting insights from guys like you in Pearls, and that was a life-saving thing for me. And I think that with these groups now, you don't have to feel alone, that you can have that mentorship in the palm of your hand. I think that's been really a game changer for me, because the way he did it, I mean, he was still using beg technique and, rotation wedges, and everyone got a, twin block, which, I mean, some of those things I did carry over and I really liked, but there's some other things that are very antiquated, but he insisted it was magic and that's the way it was. And so it was nice to have some new things to bring into the practice, to breathe new life into it, that I've learned from people like you willing to share pearls like that and having that one-on-one mentorship. I'll tell you, the one thing I wish I had done earlier was visit more practices. Like I recently went out and visited Brad Chavatal, and I walked away with like 30 pearls. I'm like, man, I can't wait to apply all of these. They're just amazing. I think I learned more, honestly, visiting practices than I did just having this single mentor for so long. And I think if I would do it again, I mean, in my situation, I would have gone and visited more practices as soon as I could, as much as I could.
No, that's huge. I think that from visiting practices, what I picked up is that online, great resource. I'll tell you, I don't know how I could have started up my practice without the Facebook forums, but you're getting a very curated opinion of why someone is successful, and it's not always completely accurate. So what I recognize quickly is that there's people who will ascribe their success to one thing or another, and it's usually something that's 100% within their control. And when you go and visit a practice, you see factors that they've become completely tone deaf to. I visited practices that have, for example, a 90-95% conversion rate, and I'm thinking, from my own experience, man, their TCs must be incredible salesmen. And I walk into this consult and it lasts 5 minutes, and the TC basically handed them a sheet of paper and they just signed on the dotted line. And what I recognize from that is there's something different going on here. And in that specific example, I recognize the marketing is what was really driving the conversion rate more so than the TCs. The TCs are just teed up to sign the paper and move on. So you're not going to get that from someone who knows nothing else. And of course, they're going to say, well, our TCs are the best. But when you visit a practice, you can identify the things that they've gone tone deaf to. And what I always recommend is don't try to copy exactly what they're doing, but try to understand how did they evolve into this position given the circumstances and given the strengths of that individual. So I'm always more interested in the process of evolution than what specifically are you doing, and let me write all this down and give it to my office and copy everything.
Staffing these days feels like a constant battle. Finding reliable, high-performing team members who actually stay is tougher than ever. That's where My Ortho VA steps in. Their expert, HIPAA-trained virtual assistants are screened and pre-trained in orthodontics, ready to plug in and perform without the headaches of hiring and rehiring. Whether you need help answering phones, verifying insurance, or even submitting lab cases, My Ortho VA has you covered, so your practice runs smoothly and your team breathes easier. Interview your next best hire today at myorthova.com.
That's a great point, Andy. And we've been fortunate to lecture a little bit on conversion rate because that has been something that has been an evolution in our startup. I took someone who had no prior ortho experience. She had done a little bit of medical billing before she had kids, but she was basically a stay-at-home mom. And I love stay-at-home moms because they're running so many things simultaneously. They're juggling, 10 different things at once, and they develop a lot of people interpersonal skills. And so when you take that and you put them in a TC room that's comfortable and inviting, that feels like a living room, and you put them in talking to parents and understanding how they make decisions regarding their child's healthcare or their personal goals, they click really well in those instances. And so she's been really, really good. And what interesting was for us is when we started to get bigger, we thought, okay, well, when we were just basically her and me, she was doing all the phone calls and all the letters and all that stuff. Let's see if we can have someone else do the phone calls for new patient exams. And what ended up happening is we gave that job to two other people that were primarily at the front desk. And we track our conversion rate over the quarter and monthly. And we noticed we saw a downward trend for the first time in our startup. And it was around year 3. And we're like, why is our conversion rate going down? We had already raised our prices. That didn't hurt our conversion rate. We haven't changed our hours. Nothing else changed. We said, well, what's the one thing we did different? Oh, well, our TC is not taking the new patient phone call anymore. We had someone else. And so what was happening is we weren't creating those connections on the phone. We might have missed some really slight nuances and things that they said, or an issue about insurance, or we didn't say certain things that we used to say. And all of a sudden it showed up in our numbers. So when we took that back and said, hey, let's make the TC more in charge of their own schedule, in charge of booking their own column and making those return phone calls. The first thing is, one, we didn't lose any. Like, we did not lose leads because we made them wait 24 to 48 hours to get a call back from the TC. That was the first thing.
That's interesting.
Did not lose any leads. Then the second was our conversion rate went up without any other inputs into the system. And that happens because she can control everything that goes in, and she makes the person accountable to that information they've already given her. So it just closes the loop, and there's no handoffs, right? There's zero handoffs in that type of scenario. So we feel that a TC can probably do about 50 consults a month and take their own calls as long as they have at least one admin day and time in between patients to make those follow-ups. And it's worked.
Well, I'll say this, Colby. I mean, the results speak for themselves with the highest acceptance rate of all the Colorado-based OrthoFi users. I remember that was a stat you claimed at the Ormco forum. I tried some of this stuff. I remember hearing you lecture last year at the Ormco forum, and I thought, wow, what a great idea, because I do get frustrated when the intake sheets are improperly filled out. Not all the information is on there. And also, every area is probably a little bit different. I've heard people where the doctors do the confirmation calls. That's not something that I'm really looking to get myself involved with. But what I did notice is that our TCs are constantly missing those confirmation calls. It's frustrating to come into a morning huddle and see that half of our new patients have not spoken to the TC ahead of time to be prepped. And of course, those consults, sometimes you hit them, but they're generally speaking the weaker consults. So I like this process because the TC has that confirmation effectively immediately over the phone, and they've already formed that relationship. It's basically cutting an extra step out. Now, the caveat, of course, is that the TC has to be available. That's one thing that we run into some issues with. And we have 2 TCs in our practice, which does mean that usually one of them is free. And I like how that's sort of self-balancing. If one TC is overloaded with consults, naturally the other one is going to start taking some of these calls, and it sort of oscillates between the two. I can't say this is a direct result of there's so many confounding variables, but Our conversion rate has significantly gone up since doing this. Now, again, lots of confounding variables there, but I do like your system. I think it works pretty well.
Yeah, that's great, Andy. And I think what you're doing is you're ultimately putting, if your TC is in charge of that key performance indicator of conversion rate, if they're truly in charge of it, then they should be in charge of every input into that particular variable. So if we are looking at those really key metrics for, let's say, bracket breaking, right? Who's in charge of that? Well, it should be your lead assistant or your group of assistants. So if you want to incentivize that group, telling them, oh, we did 10 more starts than month over month from last year. Well, that's not really incentivizing them to something they can control. So why would you bonus a back team member for something that they're not really directly related to?
I completely
But they
agree.
are directly related to, things like treatment time. Right? They have a huge impact on treatment time. They can pre-book appointments to try to get someone done by an important date. They can check in the bracket breaking or ordering. Those are things that you can easily do. Run Coney has a great system for using essentially a quarterly budget that feeds into his ordering person, who if she stays within the budget, she gets a flat bonus. And I remember going to Ron Coney's course when I was a resident and thinking that's a brilliant way to make sure we don't overspend. Right.
Yeah.
And that person in charge of ordering can make sure that there's a budget based on production, not some imaginary, we need this type of thing. But that's a really easy fix if you're having issues with ordering. We do a lot of stuff on auto ship now, so it's not so big. And then when we use ODB, Ormco digital bonding, or aligners, we're only paying when we're starting a patient. So hopefully the income from that patient balances out. So we find our ordering budgeting working a lot better that way. But again, these are all things to think about. If you have staff or team members that are being incentivized by metrics that they don't control, then you're probably not really rewarding them for things that they're doing.
Teeters and I talk about this quite a bit with when it comes to these incentives. And one book that I highly recommend anyone read if you're considering a bonus system is Drive by Daniel Pink. Are you guys all familiar with the concept there? Yeah, it's basically about harnessing intrinsic motivation as opposed to extrinsic motivation. So a reward system like a dollar amount for output would be an example of extrinsic motivation. Whereas intrinsic motivation is, this podcast would be a great example of intrinsic motivation. This is something that we do because we're passionate about it. We don't make any money off of this thing, but it's a fun thing to do, and we really put our all into it for it. So what you want to do is give people autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And if you can find a way to align those three values with the direction of your goals, then people are going to really give their all as opposed to just do enough to get the bonus. Just to finish up this thought a little bit, it does matter what the type of task is. If it's a more creative task with a little more freedom in the direction of getting there, that's going to be a better option for intrinsic motivation. If it's something like we need to paint the office, there's no creativity in there, it's just a mechanical task, then that's going to lend itself more to an incentive. So for example, your contractor, I'm going to incentivize you to, if you finish 10 days earlier than your estimate, then I'm going to give you a $1,000 bonus. Something like that could work very well. But if you go to Joe Architect and say, I want you to give me the best design you've ever done, and if it's a really, really good design, I'm going to give you a $10,000 bonus. That's not going to work as well. In fact, that will be antithetical to that creative process. So
that's cool.
That's interesting.
And of course, you have to be aware of unintended consequences here, because just like any of those animal studies that they've done that evaluate rewards, eventually you become accustomed to it and it no longer has that bonusing effect. You don't get extra value out of it. It becomes something that feels entitled, and you just have to pay it out, and you're getting no extra production out of it. So you have to be very careful with how you structure these. I think there's a right and a wrong way. Everything that I've heard indicates that random intermittent rewards is what what tends to do it. You never want them to get so used to it. So you give random bonuses here and there so that it really feels like a reward. And the data shows that when you bonus randomly, you don't get it every time that you hit the button, but you get it maybe 2 out of 3 and they're completely random. They actually want to hit that button a little bit more.
Interesting.
When I say they, I'm referring to animal studies. I know this is going to get kind of weird, but it's the same thing for human beings. I'm including myself in that. We all are accustomed to this. It is what it is. So did you say that you have a bonus system, Colby?
So we have not capped out at our salary levels yet to the point where bonuses are going to be taking over. So Adam Schulhoff, he's a great friend of mine and CEO of Grin and someone who was on your podcast here recently. I think he's figured out the easiest way for a practice to be self-sustaining with bonuses. And if you get a chance to talk to him about how he runs that, but basically it's turned it over to them where they're the ones filling the schedule and they're the ones, cramming in another consult to try to get their goals because everybody's incentivized the right way. So I've been much more in that camp of using random, kind of seemingly sporadic bonuses for extra efforts. Also for things that I know are above and beyond. Sometimes the task gets some kind of a bump or privilege. And then we also use bonuses to incentivize change. So going along with what you're saying about not making it a routine thing, we were doing really good work. We are doing good work, but our Google reviews really didn't show it in terms of a number. And so we were kind of stagnant around 70 Google reviews and we wanted to hit 100. And so I told the team, well, you guys are going to get $100 if you hit 100, and I'll give you $1 more each for every review that you get over 100. And I had a 1 month time limit. And do you guys want to guess how many reviews they got in such a short period of time? Yeah, no, we had almost 90 more reviews in 1 month.
Wow.
And they just asked every single person. And some of them even said, hey, I get a bonus for this if you write a review. So could you write a review?
And people want to do that. Patients want to reward them.
Yeah, I know, Chris, absolutely. You've been pushing the reviews really hard in your practice. What are some things that have worked for you to build that side of it?
So I guess I look at it a little differently, and I need to reread Pink and kind of go over that again. But I have very structured bonuses where if they hit a certain target, they get it, so they know what they're going for. And does it lose its power? Probably. But when it comes to reviews, we've been very successful. And so what we did is we ordered these whitening syringes with our logo on it, and we can get them on Alibaba for less than $1 each. And what we do is we incentivize the team member for every review that you get, you write it on your sheet. And when you have 5, bring it to me, I'll give you a $50 gift card. But with that, the way that you can get a patient to want to leave a review is say, hey, if you feel we deserve a 5-star review, we'd be happy to give you whitening. And what's the perfect time to do that? When they're getting braces off, right? So you're taking braces off all the time. You say, hey, and they always ask hey, do you have whitening? We say, we do. It's $25 for a syringe, or leave us a 5-star review and it's free. Well, they take free every time. And Dina up front, she's just a rock star. She comes to me with a sheet 3 times a day, sorry, doc, here's another $150 today. I'm like, no, I want you to bring that to me. This is great. Right, exactly. And so to the point where the rest of the team are almost
that's a price I'm happy to pay.
I'm very happy to pay that. But then the rest of the team were kind of well, she gets all the reviews. I'm like, well, you can ask for a Yelp review and you can get one too. So, I don't want to stifle her. I said, you make it a friendly competition. So reviews, we got to, I think we're over 700 and something now within a couple of years. It works great. In terms of start bonus, that's really tough because we don't bonus the whole team if we hit a certain number of starts. But you're right. The back office has no say in that really, other than doing a same day start, which we bonus for a little bit too. For every same day start, $25 is split between the whole team. Last month we got a lot of them, so there was a nice little uptick. But I like your idea of structuring the back bonus a little different than the front bonus, which I'll look into because right now it's kind of same across the board. Everyone has a shot at it for meeting these metrics, these KPIs.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I mean, we've mostly done the collective bonus too, and we do try to vary up the KPIs from month to month, but it's interesting. The months where we have, maybe get 10 Google reviews, 15 Google reviews as a bonus, we always hit those, which is interesting. If it's not being bonused, we never hit it. But I've actually taken a little bit of the Sheldon Salins approach recently, recently, which is as the doctor ask for it.
Yeah.
And that seems to work really well. You know, I'll pick and choose the right time. Often a debond or a final retainer check where we're quote unquote graduating the patient is a great time to ask. And, you know, I try to keep it very casual and not be pushy about it. But it's interesting. I feel like when I ask it and I also say, you know, can I ask a favor of you? And they seem to want to repay the doctor too. So it seems to work pretty well.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
You know, all these are great pearls. And this is why I love the Ortho Pearls group and why it was so easy to get so involved with it early on. And it was kind of just as a funny memory that turned into something bigger was after doing a few posts, maybe showing an early class 2 elastic post or something like that, or commenting on posts by, you know, Brian and other people. I think I said something like, hey, does anyone have any good jokes to tell patients? And that post like blew up. There was like 300 comments on that post on Pearls. And this is probably right. This is right before the first Pearls meeting. So I think,
and it's still going, by the way. Every now and then we still get another hit on that post.
And it was so fun because all of a sudden people just start piping up. And my wife is an author, so she has formatters and other people she works with. And I saw all these jokes. I was like, we could totally put this in a book. You know, and just make a joke book out of all these doctors' posts. And I thought, wouldn't it be fun to put their picture in it and they could put it in their waiting room? And so we did that. So we had the first Pearls joke book, which was from contributions from the Pearls members. And we had it ready for the first Pearls meeting in Newport Beach, which was super fun. And my wife gets pretty upset at me because she has books on Amazon as well. They're mostly YA, like, you know, fantasy type books or Cinderella retelling, things like that she's written. And so every month we get a little thing from Amazon to say how many books we've sold. And sometimes my joke book sells more on Amazon than her books sell. And it's not a very happy evening when we get that email and it's like, oh, look who sold more books. And I'm like, okay, well, it's usually right around the time when, students graduate or things like that. Or, that's when people buy these books to give as gifts. But it's been kind of just a fun thing to have that in the waiting room. And I know, Chris, you have it in your waiting room.
We have it in the TC rooms and the waiting room. We got it in the back.
I've got it
and
too.
Every time I come in, about every other time that I come in, a patient's reading that book while they're waiting for me. Yeah. And I love it. And
I think someone stole mine. I haven't seen it in a while. I think I need to get another one. Yep. But you have a volume 2 out, and then I think we were talking about doing a volume 3 as well. I pitched the idea of doing an after dark version so we could use some of my jokes in there, but I guess the ortho world's not ready for that. But I know we all have this book in front of us. I'd love to share just a couple of my favorite ones from the book. Of course, I'm going to start with my own because I'm narcissistic that way, which is my first job was working in an orange juice factory, but I got canned.
Yeah.
Just couldn't concentrate.
That's good.
All right. What are some of yours, Seta? What are some of your favorites? I see you got a bookmarked like the ENTJ that you are.
Well, since I'm playing the role of Brian today, love you, Brian. Here's one of your jokes. And I got to say, Brian, I really appreciate your humor, especially because I grew up in the early 80s. I'm a huge fan of the Muppets and Fozzie Bear, so I feel like I'm channeling Fozzie too a bit. Why did the computer go to the dentist? Because it had Bluetooth. Waka, waka, waka.
That's awesome.
Teeters, you got one?
Yeah, it's one of my own, but this is the one that parents always point out to me when they walk in, oh, this one was my favorite. And it was, hey, you won't believe it. I found gas for 99 cents today. Unfortunately, it was at Taco Bell. The kids love that one, especially the boys.
Now, Colby, you're the author here. You have read through every one of these, and I'm sure filtered them. I want to hear, give me your top 1 or 2.
Well, I do have a joke about
books.
paper, but it's terrible.
Oh, terrible!
That's the joke.
Oh, I see what you did there.
Terrible.
You got to think about it for a minute.
Yeah. Took me a minute.
I think a good one. Kids always show me this one. It's like, well, what's red and bad for your teeth? A brick.
Oh,
it's not going to be good. Okay. So no, but it's been super fun, and again that just fills in with all of our personalities and the practice, and ultimately anything you can do that points back to that most valuable asset in your practice, which is you, the doctor. That has to come through in everything you do, from your branding, your messaging, the way you interact with your patients chairside and in the consult room. All those things feed in. And so I love activities that are synergistic with our ultimate mission. And when we started Level Up Orthodontics, we really said, well, our inspiration is really helping other people find theirs. we are patient centric. And it doesn't matter if you're working in a DSO or you're working as an associate or any different place you're at, if it's a startup that you started yourself, you have to be patient centric. And the person who I think has inspired me the most in this realm is Neil Kravitz. He was a huge, so many things that he would do that showed that he was all about the patient. He'd be in the office on Sundays working, and he would post a message and say, "Hey, I'm in the office today. If someone needs to come in for an appointment, come on in," right? Does not shy away from after hours care, gives and shares everything that he teaches, is open for use for anyone. I was teaching at the dental school that I went to in Western. He let me use many of his resources early on when I didn't have them, and that was awesome. So understanding that that's the kind of practice I wanted to build, that was the person that I wanted to be in the community, really helped. And bringing us all together in things like this podcast or the Facebook group really just, again, give you permission to be uniquely you. And that really is our own path to our success, right? We cannot define our success by someone else's achievements or someone else's practices numbers or what someone else views as success. It has to be uniquely ours. And when I started Level Up Orthodontics, I really thought I wanted to have results like the best orthodontists on the planet. I didn't want to sit and do the same things I was always doing. And I also didn't want to have the practice just be a business. I wanted it to be a method to serve the community and serve people. So we did a lot of different things, I think, right off the bat that really changed the focus of the practice early on. One was we started giving away free treatment to deserving members of our community. And that was something I took a little bit from Cole Johnson and his Adopt a Unicorn program, if you're familiar with his practice. But the thing that his mom was a foster care mom, right? And so he felt, very close to those members of his community, and he wanted to give back in that way. And I was always told, if you give stuff away for free, they're not going to value it, right? Don't give a free retainer because they're not going to value it. And I said, well, what's the best thing that I can give? It's going to be treatment, because that's the most valuable resource I have in terms of a dollar thing. And if someone can't afford treatment, they're not even going to kind of come into my practice. Yet we know there's many people that need treatment and care. So we actually partner with dentists in the community to nominate people, and that's been awesome. So the dentists are like, "Yep, I'm going to do free work for this person," and I say, "Yeah, here's a certificate. Give it to them. We'll do free orthodontic treatment for them as well." And then once that person finishes, we give them another certificate. So it's just this constant flow of patients that are super grateful, supported by their dentist, and it gives back. And then our patients get involved because they adopt our Yeti, our mascot, and they feed some of their donated funds into that. And many of the patients that get free treatment end up donating big at the end, like really, really big, because they want us to keep going with this program.
You know who loves My Ortho VA almost as much as the doctors? The in-office teams. Imagine giving your front desk the gift of fewer phone calls. Imagine your financial coordinator getting ahead of insurance instead of constantly chasing it. My Ortho VA's virtual assistants plug into your system seamlessly, handling the tedious tasks that bog you down. The result? Happier employees, smoother days, and a better patient experience. Orthodontic success isn't just about straighter teeth, it's about a stronger, less stressed team. See how easy it can be at myorthova.com.
I think what you said there is getting the dentist involved is the best way to screen for these things, because there's a right way and a wrong way to give out free. And I think the ones that there's hustlers out there for sure. And I think if you just open this up, it gets abused. But if you trust your dentist and, they're giving free treatment on this patient too, they're already putting their money where their mouth is. And I think that's a great way to partner. We've done that with our referring dentists as well. Some people love it. Other people just kind of ignore it. But I will say that one of the more rewarding cases that I treated, and it was one of the more complex ones too. I remember it was the golden ticket. That's what we called it. Maybe you call it something similar, but I gave these out, and the first patient I got from this was one of those ones where like you walk in to do the pre-consult, like we probably all do, looking at the photos and the x-ray. And I just my eyes just went wide. I was like, where do I even start with this? There were multiple missing teeth, ankylosed retained E's. Everything was tipped in, cavities on every tooth. It was like practically rotting out. I mean, the kid obviously needed dental work. He was an older teenager, but I looked at this and just thought, oh my gosh, what have I done? And we got an outstanding result because the guy was a rock star. I mean, this is a true case of need, and he knew it. Parents were very grateful. They ended up starting another kid with us at full price. But this kid, really knocked it out of the park and was just so grateful for it. On the other hand, I've had others where when we've given free treatment to, say, referring offices, not to use for their patients, but for their own staff, it's hit or miss, but more often it's a miss, I've found. I have found that it does not translate to any kind of increased referrals or really even that much goodwill. And I have found that they tend to be the most entitled patients that I have. Yeah. It's a messy situation. And at this point, I have stopped doing free care for employees of referring offices for that reason. Yep. Doesn't move the needle on referrals, and you just end up inheriting a headache that has no skin in the game, that has no incentive to ever, get out of your office. It can be kind of a mess that way.
And that's really tough because it's coming from a good place, but these are the kind of things that as a startup owner, you make these decisions and then you realize it doesn't work. And so that's why I liked using Jill Allen, because she could kind of peer around the corner and say, well, in 5, 7, 10 years, what is your practice going to look like? And the advice she gave me too is, hey, let's set up all your systems as if your practice was 5 or 10 years old. Let's not make, startup type decisions. Let's make fully functioning, high operational, procedure based decisions. So that was really helpful for me to set fees and try to keep to them. So we set, an employee of a referring office fee. And I said, I'm not gonna, figure it out each time. My TC can follow that framework, and it's worked out for us. And so I think anytime you're trying to think of a transition plan or any type of a startup, you do have to have the end in mind. And when I did the startup, I think that just like you're finding out the hard way, hey, I tried this out and it didn't work, and I've since retrenched into a new way of thinking. We really, with our marketing and our branding and even just the types of patients that we're trying to attract, we said, what kind of things would this person want? And if we did what they wanted, we will attract more of the like. We'll attract more of the same. And so we started making those decisions, even if they were expensive decisions early on. But one thing you told me, Andy, is you wanted to use a bracket that was really good. You wanted to use a system that was easy for your team to learn. And you felt like the initial investment when you partnered with Ormco, you told me this, I've never not been able to pay that bill, right? I've never hurt to make that. And I always felt like it fed back into my practice. And so when I look at those systems and things, like we had Kelsey Montague come in and paint a mural in our practice. I really wanted something like a showstopper in my practice. And I wanted Joe Architect to design it because I loved his designs. And so I spent a lot of my own money that I'd saved up from Canada to try to really make this startup something special. And it's really perpetuated that way because the things that we choose, again, feed into our ideal patient. So if you're choosing things because it's convenient now and it's not actually what you would do later, then I would say don't do it. Like, stick with what you're going to be true to in the future. And if you feel like, using digital systems now might have a little bit of a higher price tag, I promise you that as you build your systems around that, you can get over those sticky kind of growth spots in your processes and grow a lot faster and be able to see more consults and do more starts when your practice does pick up. And I think that's the other thing is that it will pick up. Right. If you're injecting your true authentic self into a startup and you're trying and you're grinding and you're on Pearls and you're sharing and listening to Pearls, you're going to meetings, hearing what other doctors are doing and pulling away how they actually, what their problem was and how it evolved. Just like you said, Andy, when you do that and you work at it, it will grow. There's no way it's not going to. So we don't have to live in a place of scarcity or a place of fear thinking that it's not going to work out. It will work out, but it takes some effort, takes some input.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that, Colby. I know we all come from different backgrounds, some as far as practice goes, acquisitions, startups, associateships. You've had a unique background. I think you've done several types of practice models, Colby. Let's talk a little bit about what you've learned between the different practice models. So you started up with an acquisition in Canada. You moved on to your startup. And while you're doing that, I believe you're also associating. So let's start with you, Colby. Tell us a little of what you've learned about each of those models, the good, the bad, the ugly. And then I'd like to just kind of go around the table here and hear everyone's unique experience with that.
I think the really key part when you're buying a practice is I feel like your major emphasis and focus has to be maintaining the goodwill. And that is number one. Mm-hmm. I think even if your numbers don't show it, do the things that maintain the goodwill, because for whatever reason, sometimes even against what we would think are people's better judgment, that practice that you bought is successful enough to be worth something at the end of the day. So every dollar that you spent on that practice ultimately is goodwill. So if you're not retreating those patients that need to be retreated, if you're not taking in an opportunity to see a patient after hours, if that's what is needed, if you're not doing those things, you're not feeding back into the goodwill. You cannot just expect the business to operate without that infusion of yourself into it, the same way that previous practice owner did. So, or even in addition to that, right? You may not have the same reputation that they have coming into it. So if I'm buying a practice right now, the biggest lesson I would say is do everything you can to keep the goodwill. That's number one. The second is, and maybe you guys have heard this from other people, but I was given the advice to not change anything the first year of buying a new practice. Mm-hmm. I actually think that's the wrong way to do it. Okay. I thought at the time that made sense. And I kept to that, or in my mind, I think I changed very few things in my opinion of the practice, but I was starting to do aligners. I bought a scanner for the first time in that practice. I changed the archwire sequence a little bit. And at the end of a year after, taking over the practice, we had a team meeting we typically did every other month. And I said, okay, well, it's been a year since I've taken over the practice and I feel like I haven't changed that much. And everyone's like, you changed everything. They're like, this is not the same practice anymore. You've changed literally everything. And in my mind, I thought, I thought I was doing pretty good at just maintaining the status quo. And so no matter what you do, it's a huge change. So if you're holding back on something that you really want to do, just do it. And the people that will ultimately follow you and that will be magnetically attracted to your ambition and your drive, they will stay around and they will help you on that path. And if they're not attracted to that, then they'll leave, and you're saving yourself that slow kind of sickness that creeps into a team when they don't identify with the leader. So, that's what I would say is just rip the Band-Aid off, do what you need to do. Obviously, you can't change everything at once, and don't flip-flop a lot. That can be really difficult. So I think that's a big takeaway, but I love the transition because of the goodwill. There's nothing better than having initial referrals and existing patients to then build the practice from the inside out. Yeah. And that's really important. I think when I went into working for a DSO, specifically as an associate in Denver, what I went into is saying, what can I bring to this organization that's going to give them value? And I really wanted to be a valuable member of their team. And so after me sharing some of the insights that I had from private practice, they said, hey, why don't you come on our clinical advisory board? And I was able to do that with them for a year. And we changed a lot of the intervals and things internally within that DSO. And I actually really enjoyed that part of it. So I think if you're a type of person where you want to still be of value wherever you're at, I think you can lift where you stand. You can help an organization and ultimately help your own patients if you are keeping yourself accountable to where you're at. Don't just think of it as a clock in, clock out job. I'd never approached my associate job as the associate job. I put just as much effort into trying to create systems and things in that place because I was just being authentic. And this is just the things that I want to do. I didn't feel comfortable treating patients differently in that setting that I did somewhere else. So I would say if you find an associate job where you can be your true authentic self and have freedom and autonomy to behave as such, I would say that's a great job. And I would not shy away from that or think that it's less than someone else's job. You just need to have that ability to grow and learn, because if you don't have autonomy, what do you have? Right? You're just a slave. And so any associate job that you take, I say, look for those things. I would talk to other doctors that are working for that group or other groups and see what things they like and dislike. I would make sure that the numbers are free. If you're incentivized off the numbers working as an associate in a corporate, I'd want to see the numbers for the last 6 months or last year and see what the trend is there, right? So you can know what you're going into, and they should be able to give you those numbers. If a DSO said, I'm not going to show you those numbers, that's a huge red flag. flag if you're getting paid off production. So that's what I would say is really just do your homework on an associate job and then enjoy it. Enjoy it for what it is. Like there's things that you can learn. I know when you were working for PDS, maybe most of your lessons were things not to do. And that's not necessarily that PDS does something wrong. Now they might, but I'm just saying it's more of that it didn't jive with you. And so it's a different scale they're working at. You can't do, and again, when you say autonomy, there's a degree of autonomy, but not the same as in your own practice. What you need to look at that is a time period to learn who you are and say, what do I want to do? What things am I comfortable doing or not comfortable doing? And in some ways you just have to say, this is what I want to, this is who I want to be. And this is what I want to operate as, and live in that zone. And, I know female orthodontists that close their practice at 3:00. And why do they do that? Well, because they have to go pick up their kids from school, right? And they get the community on board because they know why they're going to this practice and they're willing to make those changes.
Well, I'll bet they also have some of the best employees in that city, because that is the biggest barrier to employment right now. It's kind of shocking to me when some of these assistants are asking to be let go at 3:00. That's when they start. That's like when everything comes. But again, you attract what you put out there, and people will find you. And you just have to run with that business model, whatever is authentic. It may not be super profitable, at least not as much as, say, an office that's open till 7, but it's going to be more profitable than you might think, because that office that's open till 7 has to hire the assistants who are willing to work a 12-hour shift, for example, which they probably are looking at as a stepping stone. We see that a lot with some of the corporate practices out here. You might have noticed that in corporate as well, Colby, is that a lot of people, doctors and the assistants, see it as a stepping stone. And it's hard to create consistent systems with constantly shifting sand like that. So just by that virtue, I feel like private practice has an edge.
That's a good point. Well, and I think with understanding what things matter to in this community, all that's going to help feed into you creating the practice that can do both things. It can serve you and serve your patients. And so, a practice that closes at 3 probably opens at 7 a.m., right? They're going to see patients before school. And so these are the ways that you can work with your focus groups within your practice. And then, when you get to know yourself, again, the biggest things I took away from working at a DSO was understanding how to manage a bigger team and ultimately how I wanted to practice long term. Because if I said, well, I actually like working for this DSO, I think they do a good job overall, but could I do this for 20 years? And the answer is no. And then why is the answer no? And then I could list those reasons, and I'd say, what could I do that would actually keep me, interested and engaged for a longer period of time? So when you're doing a startup, I think, the biggest thing is location to start, and that's a big lesson I learned. And I actually pulled this from Icon Orthodontics in Calgary, because Corey Lowe took his practice and he was on the outskirts of town at the time, and then the community grew around him. So I think it's smart to pick a location that has that growth potential. But I also see practices that do really well that are somewhat landlocked and haven't had or don't have the opportunity for new families to move in. And so when new families move in, I think you need to focus more on marketing. If you're in a landlocked area, you better be doing mailers to new homes. And that's an easy mailer that you can send out, where it'll go not just to every door, but to doors or to practice or houses, that have sales in them, new sales. And so you can market heavily to those people that are moving into your area. If you're new and the area is growing around you, you have a little bit of, favorable winds going your way, but you have to, make yourself available to the community. You need to show up in as many places as possible. And I think with digital marketing now, they can target that. They can put your face everywhere, and you got to show up on the moms groups. You have to be, you have to do something that's worth talking about. So, you can't just do what people have always done. You have to be unique and have something worth sharing.
Imagine a world where not a single phone call goes to voicemail, no missed opportunities. With My Ortho VA, that dream is actually possible. Their virtual assistants specialize in phone support, making sure your patients hear a friendly voice every time they call, not a machine. Plus, they're trained specifically for orthodontic practices, so they know how to handle your patients the right way. Protect your patient experience and your peace of mind with My Ortho VA. Learn more at myorthova.com.
Well, another point there, Colby, is you mentioned that location is very important, but maybe the specific factors around a location are more fluid. And for example, I visited a lot of practices when I was starting up. That was a huge way how I got my experience because I'd never worked in a private practice before. So I had to get that through visiting offices. And one thing I noticed is there are some very obvious factors that make a location very, very good. Things like saturation rate, average income, age demographics. There's things that are universally good for an orthodontic practice. And there's some other areas where someone will go in and kill it. And if you're just looking at the face value, like, oh, he did it, so I can probably do that too, you might be missing out. This was a conversation I had with Chris Benson, as a matter of fact, where I was looking at different locations across the country. And I said, well, what about this location here? That looks good. It's wide open. There's no one there. I think there's one other orthodontist. He seems to be killing it. No, why not? Why don't I just move there? And he says, well, what you have to consider is that community is a religious community and you're not that religion. So I was like, oh, okay, light bulb went off. It doesn't mean that I can just duplicate that. There was a very specific niche that this person was serving, and he did it very, very well. And I think in a situation like that, you can look at it from two angles. Can I serve that niche better than he is? Or is there another underserved niche that I can serve better than that guy? And if you can answer one of those two questions, it's good. But don't just go blindly in because this guy's killing it and he's the only guy in town, then I'm going to do the same thing. Seta, I want to talk to you a little bit because I know you've had some interesting background here as well. So you're an associate. What have you taken away from your associate position? And I know that you've floated the idea of maybe doing your own practice at some point. What goes into that decision-making process for you, and what would you be looking for in a private practice, and why even make the transition?
Sure. Well, I think that's a great question. I've always been an associate only at private practices. Some have been solo practitioners, some have been orthopedo practices, some have actually been sort of interdisciplinary practices, actually. I've always wanted to be an owner. I would say maybe it just hasn't quite worked out that way. Currently, I have been looking for an opportunity to acquire a practice. As you know, with the current climate, that's a lot more difficult and challenging right now. What people are asking for their practices is a little bit insane, for lack of a better word. So, I've considered the startup. I'm in my mid-40s. Hats off to you, Colby, for taking that plunge. I don't know if I quite have that risk tolerance, but also, for me, what goes into that decision is I love doing things like this. I love being a podcaster. I love having the product that I have. Yeah. Just as much as orthodontics fills my cup, so does things like this. And I feel like if I went and dove headfirst into a startup, I probably would have to give up some of these things. So that's why I think I'm learning to become content in a way with where I'm at and grateful for where I'm at, and not feeling that pressure. I think a lot of times when people want to become a practice owner, it can be a little bit of like ego too, right? So perhaps my ego is looking for that set of orthodontics opportunity. Mm-hmm. Hopefully I answered your question there, Andy. But Colby, if I could actually touch on something you said before, which I love. I love how you think differently about marketing. So many people are going towards the digital side of marketing. Mm-hmm. And I know what you love to do as well is really build those relationships with the general dentist. Mm-hmm. And I know you're like a leader of a Spear Study Club. I think that's so important because I know our patients that are referred from general dentists, the conversion rate is insanely high. It's fantastic, actually.
No, that's a good point. And I think, that was a little bit of when I moved from Canada to Colorado, it's a very different market. Canada, people have in their mind that to see a specialist of any type, they have to have a referral. People, we always would have to remind people, hey, you don't need a referral to see an orthodontist. But many times they're like, oh, well, I'm waiting for my general dentist to send me. And I'm like, oh no, that you can come right now. There's fewer specialists in Canada just across the board, which, is another problem. But the thing that I learned coming to the United States was that, we have specialists of all types. And in some markets, there's a lot of hungry people because there's too many of them, right? So they're doing their own ortho. Many of the pedo offices that I thought were independently owned were actually owned by orthodontists. They didn't practice in there, but they would essentially funnel the patients back to them, or they were some kind of a silent DSO type. And so when I came into Parker, Colorado, I kind of came with these rose-colored glasses and seeing all these other offices and thinking, these are all potential referrals. And then when I actually got boots on the ground, I was like, this is very different. And because I was used to getting a lot of referrals from general dentists who were seeing kids. And then I went into general dental offices and I was like, oh, you guys aren't seeing kids here? They're like, no, we don't. All the pedodontists, they're the ones that see the kids. And, in Canada, it wasn't that way. All the GPs were very, by need, they were very, versed in how to treat most kids. And so many practices were truly family practices that were referring to me. So, getting a lot of referrals, we were doing about 130 consults a month in Canada. And most of those came from GPs. They didn't come from specialists. So when I went down to Parker, it was like, oh, this is totally different. So I kind of chose to double down on really those relationships with everybody. But I started with the GPs, and I really just went into their practice and says, hey, what do you like about your orthodontist? What are they doing that you enjoy? And when they would say something about interdisciplinary cases, oh, I have a couple here I can share with you. I love cosmetics and I love this and that. I went to an Invista meeting with a few of the dentists at one point. I brought in a speaker that was a friend of mine that was a cosmetic dentist and photographer to speak to some of my dentists that were interested in that. So it was really just, hey, what do you like about your orthodontist and what can I do? And just slowly start to build those relationships. And that's actually, from talking to Jill Allen, she said we were the most successful startup in terms of getting GP referrals. That was the highest that she had seen. And I think part of it was that we were on the outskirts. We had some people that had moved out there. And so we were geographically very favorable. So I think that's where the location came in. And then I think the second was, again, treating our GPs as if they were the person we needed to build our practice around as well. Like, we're not willing to just say, we're putting our stake in the ground this way and that way, and we're not open to change. Like, no, I want to hear what you're interested in and want to see what your practice is like and how can I help that. So we're very individualized in how we treat every aspect of our practice.
No, I think that's great. Something too I want to mention is that a lot of times I think we'll falsely assume as orthodontists that if dentists are offering aligners that they're not going to refer patients. But some of my best referring dentists have actually been younger dentists working for Heartland practices that offer Invisalign. And I just think they see, as an orthodontic specialist, what I'm bringing different to the table. Yeah. So I think that's important to keep in mind too, is that we shouldn't just automatically assume they'll never send patients.
That's a good point. Well, and Andy, I wanted to ask you, because you helped me a lot, especially as I was doing my startup, you get to like year 3 and your expenses start outpacing your collections. And you get a little bit nervous because, you grow a lot year 2 to year 3, but then the collections are lagging because you haven't had year 1 and year 2 collections aren't there yet. So, I'd like to hear a little bit of your lessons about how you kind of navigated going through a startup. And I know, your wife's an orthodontist, so I think maybe just basic income security was there for you, right? But maybe not. I don't know. So love to hear about it.
In a sense, when I started up, she was still a student. We were actually doing long distance, but I also didn't have any financial obligations aside from student loans. I lived in an apartment. I basically lived like a resident, but a resident in Arizona is a lot different from a resident in New York City. So my budget actually was smaller than what I was spending as a resident at Columbia. But my lifestyle actually did take a little bit of a bump. I remember feeling like, wow, I've really made it. Just the fact that I could drive my 10-year-old Camry to the grocery store and put groceries into a trunk and drive back, as opposed to having to hike that stuff up and down the subway and, fend off people trying to steal my stuff, and transfer 3 trains. It was a big lifestyle improvement while also going under budget, which again is a huge factor in your location. Cost of living should definitely be factored in there. It's something I think people are more aware of it now, maybe not so much when I came out.
And Andy, how did you get over that fear of like, oh, I'm really nervous about this. I'm not sure if this is doing what I thought, or did you ever think you're like, man, maybe I should have done something else? I mean, I know you've talked about, looking at the market, but I'm like, how did you get through that? We're talking here with Chris, and he's nervous about a startup. I think we all are.
Oh, sure. Well, here's the deal: is that I'll tell you, I am one of those guys who, unfortunately, I second guess myself constantly. I don't think there's a day that goes by. Jenny calls me out on this. I have a slow month, and I'm like, I think we should. I just want to quit, and I just want to like I don't deserve this, and I suck. And then, like, literally within a couple of weeks, we'll have the best month ever. And I'm like, things are going pretty good. I feel good. Let's go out to dinner tonight. So yeah, it's a constant battle in my mind. Even now, we just hit our 10-year anniversary for our first office, and I still have those thoughts, but I'm getting better. When I first started up, it was just a constant anxiety fest. I remember I was very cautious with spending money. I wanted to spend money on the things that really mattered. Like I invested in our software early because I knew I didn't want to do a software conversion. I invested in the structure of our building and in the aesthetic of our building because that's not something you can change very easily. But I only put 2 chairs in, for example. I only hired 1 employee to start off with. A lot of things I did very piecemeal, the things that I could replace later. Maybe a little too cautious, but yeah, you talk about financial insecurity. I kept my expenses down, but when I looked at my budget, the first third of my take home was going back to student loans. And then after that, maybe another quarter of it was going towards my basic living expenses, rent. I didn't have a car payment, but just things of that nature. And this tiny little sliver that was left over was for my discretionary income, and my discretionary purchases rather. And sometimes that gets a little bit demoralizing looking at that, but the anxiety, the financial anxiety was grossly overshadowed by this feeling that I needed to reach my potential, and I wasn't going to do it if I was stuck in this corporate job. Chris mentioned ego. That was definitely a factor as well. I wanted to be all of my idols in the orthodontic profession had their own practices. And I was like, I had to be that guy. I want to hold my head high. And I think that was enough to overcome the anxiety, but it was this constant tension. And I remember at one point, for a long time, I felt like I wasn't performing where I wanted to be. And growth was slower in my area than I anticipated it. We did fine. I think we broke even after about 20 months. So I was no longer in the red, which was nice, but I wasn't making a ton. And it just felt like I was growing slower than some of the people in other parts of the country. You and I have spoken about this quite a bit. And that can get demoralizing, that constant comparison. Facebook is a great tool. It gave me so many valuable pearls that are what contributed to me eventually making it. But also I was comparing myself to the curated and best image that people were creating of their practice life. And that does get you down sometimes. I remember it got so bad one time where I was working out and I was just getting flooded by all these feelings of anxiety and these feelings of you're not good enough. And I recognize that this is how I'd been motivated my whole life. I'm a little bit ADHD, so I'm kind of crisis motivated. And I recognize that I was instead of what I should have been doing was controlling those thoughts and focusing on the positive and focusing on motivational rather than demotivational. But what I was doing instead was creating catastrophes in my mind, never celebrating the victories and only focusing on what I had done wrong and saying, basically, you idiot, you're never going to make it if you keep doing this. You have to man up and get this done. And after years of doing that, I finally just collapsed. And I remember I couldn't work. I got off the machine and I sat down with my head in my hands. I'm just like, I think I'm going to quit. I don't think I can do this anymore. I just can't live with these feelings. And in that moment, I sort of reset. And I remember thinking, okay, you feel this way because you're trying to succeed and you think that success is running away from failure. And if that is causing you to quit at this point, you cannot be motivated by that anymore. And you have to find something else to carry on. And then that's when I had to look at things objectively and said, even if I'm not where I think I deserve to be, I'm still making more than I've ever made in my life. I'm making more than I set out to make, financially. My goals are all being met. Family life, personal life. I get to go on great vacations and I get to put a lot away in the bank as well. All of this, and I'm still ready to just throw it all away and then go back to working corporate dentistry. So it's a process. You've talked me off the ledge a couple of times, even since We all have our emotional ups and downs, and I think it's good to have a support system of people who can talk you off the ledge when you're feeling that way. But I'll be honest with you, it does get better, but it never goes away entirely. I still face those anxieties. I'll tell you, February this year, I think that was a universally crappy month for a lot of people. And I was already, I was like, I've been through this enough. It's like, I'm not going to panic this time, but I couldn't help it. And I started freaking out. And then we literally set a record in March, the highest month that we've ever had, made up for everything. And now we're way ahead. So, and again, I don't know what April's going to be like. Who knows with these tariffs, maybe April tanks again too. And I just have to remember, I'll probably call you, Colby, and be like, hey, what's Colorado like? I think I'm ready to move.
I'll be there if that phone call comes.
Yeah. Or Canada, right?
Yeah. Or Canada. Yeah. Canada sounds pretty good. Yeah.
Well, I think you brought up a lot of good things. I've listened to Alex Hormozy a lot, and he's a thought leader in the entrepreneurial space. And I think as entrepreneurs, it's what we're talking about here. It's really difficult to define your success because it's so subjective. I mean, people, when you set out to start Amazon, or you set out to start PayPal, like, you don't know how much success you're going to get. I mean, the sky is the limit. So you have to define success for yourself and what's good. And I like how you, in that moment, that really difficult moment where everything just felt so crushing for you, you came to the realization that, hey, I actually need to rework myself and how I'm internally motivated. And that ultimately reminds me that these challenges and these struggles that we're going through ultimately are the catalyst for that lifelong change that we all need to see in ourselves. So one of the things Alex Hormozy had said in an interview was essentially, the greater the villain, the greater the hero to meet that villain. And without a strong villain and without a very difficult challenge, the heroes will never gain the push and the drive that they need. So if your challenge isn't literally crushing you at some point, it may not have enough strength to change you. So
it's a great way.
When we're looking at a startup, if it's not crushing, you may not make personal strides. And I've had that in my family. So we've talked, Andy, about some of my family struggles, not to talk about it too much because it's a little, close, but my oldest son has autism. He's has ADHD as well, so it's very difficult, working with him at times. My second son had some pretty severe depression, and he's currently living in Missouri at a boarding school because it was just it was more than we were able to help him with. And he'll be coming home soon. He's doing so much better. It's been almost a year, but this last year has been the hardest year of my family. And 2 years ago, I lost my dad. I'm an only child. And at the same year, my son collapsed after my youngest son. So I have 4 kids. My youngest collapsed after a family trip to Hawaii with heart failure. And it turns out he has a lifelong condition with his lungs and heart. And in between there, I have a beautiful daughter who just got braces on and is cheery and happy and fun. And but I think about our family and our family situation, and I would have never thought that this was ahead for me, and that the last year or two would have been as difficult as they were on that front. So I think about all those things and about how much I've grown personally from those challenges, and even seeing my son go from probably the darkest spot that I've ever seen a kid have to go through at 14, and now making those choices for himself and coming home and reuniting with our family after that almost year. It's really incredible what those challenges can do to you. And I would say anytime that a doctor is looking at their future or trying to make decisions, I would say lean into the hardest aspect that you can find and be comfortable with the hard. The more comfort that you have in those hard moments, if you can take away something building and productive for yourself, it will change you in a way that you never thought possible. And it will give you the strength to keep going, because otherwise it's just not going to come. You can't avoid these challenges, and you have to face them. And when you do, you will grow. And that's been probably the biggest takeaway I've had through this whole process is, even I could say I deserve this, or I should have this, or my friend has this, or why don't I have this? And I could question and kind of put myself in a box and say, the world's been bad to me, or I'm not as good as I should be, and I could do all that, or I could take a different stance. And Andy, I think you did this, and I think you still need to question. I don't think you should live in this naive bubble, but I do think you can say, hey,
definitely not.
If I keep trying, I know I'm willing to do the things that it takes to get to the next step and to get to the next level. And if you're just willing to try, it will happen. And we're so blessed to have such a great profession where, unlike restaurants that close every year and hardly make it out of the first year, we could work 2 or 3 jobs if we need to make ends meet, which is what I was doing when I had a startup. I was working 6 days a week in clinical practice. And that was really tough, but I got through it. And I know so many more things now, and I'm better for it. So I do think that we can take that faith and knowing that things will work out when we give that full effort and when we look at those hardships as opportunities to grow. And I know that sounds like some kind of, live, laugh, love motto you put on an Airbnb wall or something, but it's huge.
Well, no, there's truth to these things, as always. I think that one thing that I've recognized is that being a practice owner, being a member of the community in that way has really, I guess, for lack of a better word, forced me to become a better person. Patience, for example, is one thing that you have to develop as a employer, as a member of your community, as a doctor. Look at the stuff Chris, Seta, you go through this stuff too. There's things that really try your patience every single day. The Google moms, or the myriad of like allergies, both real and imagined, that people have these days. And the political challenges. Oh my gosh, being stuck in the middle as a business owner. You guys weren't practicing during COVID. I'm not sure, Colby, you were starting up, but I just remember what kind of policies do I even enforce? We're a purple state here in Arizona, so my own leanings aside, what do I even do here? How do I balance such a politically charged environment when I am just trying to be the doctor and I just want to do the right thing by everyone? It forces you to learn patience. And I think that has translated to my ability to be a father. My daughter definitely challenges me. My son now is going to start challenging me as he gets older. And I think patience and commitment. There's times, like I said, where you just want to give up, but when you can't do it. I remember when I first started out my first year, and I was facing challenges that I didn't think I should face. One of them was IT. I had an IT guy who had just dropped me at the very last minute, right before we were supposed to open. I'm like, I don't know how to set my office up. I'm completely lost. And I remember just sitting, laying down on the floor, staring at the ceiling, saying what have I done? I wish I could just go back because I can't fix this. And I would, if I had been an employee, I would have quit. I'm like, this is an unfair thing to expect of me. I'm a doctor. I don't need to figure out how to set up a computer system, and I'm already overwhelmed. I just quit. It's not worth it. But when you own the practice, when your whole life is bought on margin, and you have to find a way to make this thing work. And like you said, Colby, in those moments, you find out what you're really made of when you have no other options. And I think the only way you can overcome a situation like that is to actually be in it. You want to avoid those, I think. You don't want to come into a situation where you have to burn your boat, or where your boat is burned for you. But once it is, you find out what you're really made of.
Well, that's awesome. And I love the takeaways from that you shared, and appreciate you sharing some of your trials. And because I think it's important to know that it's not all just easy, and that, maybe we make it look easier from the outside. Someone would stumble across Icon Orthodontics or any of these things and say, oh, well, he's just so good at marketing, or he's so good at this, and it just worked out for him. It's like, no, there were some difficult times. So I think we need to share that and make it real for people, so we can anticipate those problems. And And I think, just as another, to circle back to the definition of success, it may take you time before you figure out what that success is for you. But like you mentioned, you're getting comfortable in that situation with the things that you have and the reality of your practice. When you do feel that you're in that state of almost Zen, where you're happy with the things that are happening, you're grateful what's come to you, and you're ultimately content in your practice, that is the person who wins. That is the person who is the most successful. You have the time that you need. For me, and right now with my young family and all the special needs we have, I'm very content to work 9 days a month or 10 days a month in clinical practice and really lean into the digital systems that we're using, like the Damon system with ODB and with Grin using, telehealth to try to decrease the in-person visits. I'm very happy to double down on those things because I need the time with my family and for other pursuits. In the future, in 5-6 years, when I have a couple kids that are a little older, that may shift. And I may say, hey, I want to open up a second location. Yeah. But where I am right now, I'm happy and I'm content with what I have. And that has been the biggest thing for finding peace for me, is not having this overarching huge goal that many entrepreneurs might have when they open a practice and thinking I need to take over the country. Yeah. But I'm just saying, hey, what am I doing for my family and myself today? And if I'm content with that, then I win. I'm the most successful orthodontist in the country because I'm content, and we can all do
Fantastic.
Well, I'll say this: that's definitely how I see things too. Is having enough. I will say that's a moving target. I remember when I graduated from residency, Seta, you might be able to relate to this a little bit too, but like when I first graduated and I started working in corporate, for those first 6 months, it was the most content that I could ever remember being, because I had just graduated. I had everything in my life had been building to that moment of graduation, and I didn't really have a plan for after graduation. It was like, just plan is become an orthodontist, and then, next step, success. And for those 6 months, I felt like I'd achieved something massive, and I knew it wasn't going to last. And as soon as that 6 months hit, I was like, I need something more. I need to start my own practice. I need to find a practice. So I don't expect the contentment is going to be permanent, and I don't think it should be permanent. But enjoy it while it lasts, while not getting too comfortable in the comfort.
That's great.
Yeah. Good deal, guys. Well, hey, I appreciate all of your time here. This has been a really, really cool discussion. I want to finish up here with Colby's top 3 pearls. These can be practice, business, life. But what do you think, Colby? What are your top 3 pearls for our listeners?
Well, great. Well, I think number one, and actually I wrote these down because I wanted to make sure that I had some time to think about it, because that was actually, Andy, I really appreciate you asking that, because it really was an eye-opening to me about like, what do I feel like I could tell myself, 5 years ago or 10 years ago when I graduated. And the first thing is don't doubt yourself. Be your true, unique self. And if you infuse that into anything in your life, your business, your family, your religion, if you do that, it will be an absolute catalyst for your own personal growth and success. So be yourself, put that into everything you're doing. If you are silly and you love Star Wars, put that all over your practice. People will be magnetically attracted to you and your personality as it shows in what you're doing. And then the second...
Are you talking about David Hirsch right now?
A little bit. Yeah. Right. You got that, a little bit of that magnetic aspect.
Yeah.
There. But so here's the other thing. We're talking about success. You have to make sure that it's your success and not how other people define it. So we could say, I want a $5 million practice. I want a $10 million practice. I want to have the best results on the planet. Whatever it is that you're going to do, it's going to take time, but don't let yourself get distracted by comparison or by the I deserve box that you feel that you need to put yourself into. So get yourself out of the box. That's from the Anatomy of Peace. It's a great book, and understand where you actually are comfortable being and define that for yourself. So that definition of success is huge. And then finally, I think for me running a practice and for understanding how I've adapted to millennial parents of my patients and the post 2020 reality, because practice from 2015 to 2020 was not the same as it's been from 2020 to 2025. parents, everything is different now after COVID. And unfortunately, I feel kind of sad for the residents graduating post 2020 because they never got to have those years before. But what I would say is, meet people where they are. Build your business and your practice around meeting people with their needs and their priorities as the prime thing that you're after, and identify those people that share the same values. You'll be happier than you ever will be, rather than just casting a broad net and hoping that everybody comes to you. So meeting people where they are, using their inspiration to help you find yours, will make the difference in relating to people and finding your tribe where you practice. And that's been, again, huge for us. A lot of it came from 2 months of sitting and thinking about our brand before we even opened, with no other distractions and no work. So I essentially had a 2-month sabbatical to create the ideal practice for myself after about 5 years of practice, understanding who I was and what I wanted. And that is a hugely beneficial exercise for anyone to do looking to start a practice.
Well, great tips there, Colby. I really appreciate you. And I know we'll be chatting again a little bit, pretty much every week, like I said. Again, I want to thank my guest co-host, Dr. Chris Setta, for being on the show with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Really, really appreciate you being here.
Guys, again, keep up the great work. Andy, you're a phenomenal host, as is Chris and Brian, and honored to be on today. Colby, what an incredible story. I loved hearing about your journey. I'm so sorry to hear about the family struggles, but it's inspiring how you've overcome them. And it's all in perspective, like you said, and just really enjoyed our conversation today.
Well, thank you guys. Well, and it was super fun, Andy, to finally, get this down and have the time to get recorded and talk. I feel like we've had a lot of talks like this that never got recorded that I wish we could share.
And I feel like we just scratched the surface. There's a ton more. We could talk for 3 hours, I'm sure, easily.
But no, that was fantastic, and looking forward to listening it again. And I appreciate you being vulnerable too and sharing your story. And I've had so many good experiences with the Pearls group, and I just want to put a plug again in for Pearls, even though I'm not paid by Pearls or officially associated, maybe unofficially with the joke book. But it really was an eye-opening for me to go to those first Pearls meetings, especially where we were just building that community. And I think when doctors come together and are willing to learn and be open and share, that's when the magic happens. And Pearls has done that for me.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate you recognizing that. It's been an awesome journey, and I'm really looking forward to what we have coming ahead. If you like what you're hearing, we'd really appreciate if you would drop us a review, follow us, tell your friends about it. And while you're at it, go ahead and check out the Illuminate Orthodontic podcast. I'm sure most of you are probably familiar with that one, but you could hear Dr. Setta and his interviews, one of the OGs in the orthodontic podcast space, and personal mentor of mine. So thanks for everything that you do there, Chris.
Thank you.
And with that, we'd like to thank our audience for listening, and we will see you next time.
Struggling to find skilled, reliable team members who actually stay? My OrthoVA has the talent you've been searching for. Their orthodontic-trained virtual assistants are ready to step in and support your team with phones, billing, insurance, and more, all without the endless hiring cycle or training delays. No onboarding fees, no long-term contracts, just qualified help when and where you need it. Find your next high-performing team member at myorthova.com.